What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another video here with the Jacksonville Jaguars team breakdown. So let's get right into it. Last season, the Jaguars went 9-8, which was second in the AFC South and ninth in the AFC, so missing the playoffs. This was a team that, heading into last season, a lot of people did have playoff expectations for the Jags. So, in that regard, kind of a disappointing season. But if you look at it another way, they did go 9-8, which was a winning record, which is obviously solid. And a lot of people had anticipated the AFC South being a much weaker division than it ended up being. The Colts ended up playing pretty well, and obviously the Texans overperformed what a lot of people had expected for them, and that is obviously the team that won the division. So there is an argument to be made that if the Texans were more in line with what people had expected, then the Jags could have easily been a playoff team. So depending on how you look at it, the Jags could have disappointed last season, but it may have just been just outside circumstances that resulted in them missing the playoffs. Either way, they were a team that a lot of people expected to be in the playoffs, and they were not. Looking at how the team has changed in the offseason, the losses, losing three receivers, mostly two, Jamal Agnew, more of a return man, but a talented one. So it's a special teams loss there. Losing Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones is definitely an impactful loss in the receiving core. Zay Jones is a very solid depth receiver, and then Calvin Ridley didn't really live up to the hype that he joined the team with. Christian Kirk definitely was more of the wide receiver one, and the Jags would obviously end up moving on from Calvin Ridley, but he was still a solid contributor in that offense. Then losing a trio of defensive linemen in Kayvon Chaisson, Dwayne Smoot, and Foley Fatukasi. Losing more depth pieces on the defensive line, however, I do think the Jaguars' defensive line is one of their stronger points, and they did do a lot to address the position group through free agency and the draft as well. So I'd say these losses weren't as serious. And then losing corner Darius Williams, safety Rayshon Jenkins in the secondary, and then losing a pair of kickers in Brandon McManus and Joey Sly. Looking at the additions, as I alluded to earlier, on the defensive line, Eric Armstead is definitely the biggest one here. Getting him from the 49ers, I really like this for the Jaguars. Just a nice boost on that defensive line. Also got Travis Gibson, who's going to be more of a depth player. But losing three defensive linemen, you need to bring in new depth as well. Eric Armstead should be a solid starter, and I do like that pickup for the Jags a lot. Also getting Gabe Davis and Devin Duvernay to add to the receiving core. More depth players. Neither, I think, are going to have a huge role in this team. We'll probably see Duvernay on special teams returning kicks potentially to fill the loss of Jamal Agnew, but could also see him on the field as a wide receiver 4 maybe, assuming Gabe Davis is the wide receiver 3, Christian Kirk is the wide receiver 1, and Brian Thomas Jr., who we'll get to in a bit, being the wide receiver 2. They also added safety Darnell Savage, center Mitch Morse, corner Ronald Darby, tight end Josiah DeGuara, and Mac Jones at QB. Just a whole lot of depth pieces there. So Mitch Morse will probably start, as well as Savage. Then Darby will just be probably a depth corner. DeGuara will be a backup tight end, and Mac Jones backup quarterback. So nothing too crazy there. Looking at the draft class, as I mentioned before, Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round, I do like that. I think that he'll probably be wide receiver 2 right away behind Christian Kirk, and I do think he can take over and be that wide receiver 1. Maybe it's not this season, but it definitely could be, depending on how he performs. In the second round, drafting his LSU teammate Mason Smith for the defensive line, and then getting another LSU defensive lineman further down the board in Jordan Jefferson. So fun little, I guess, keeping the team together there. Also, getting a couple players in the secondary, and Jarian Jones and DeAndre Prince. And then adding tackle depth, drafting a kicker, another defensive end, and a running back. Overall, a lot of depth down the board, but I do like the first round pick a lot with Brian Thomas Jr. I think wide receiver was definitely a need for the Jags that they didn't really, they did address it in free agency, but not in a super meaningful way. And I think Brian Thomas Jr. really filled the hole in this roster. So not a lot of crazy picks, but I do like what they did with the draft. Overall, this offseason, I think the Jags probably got a little bit better from where they were last season. Um, just not really having too many huge losses, and then I think just not making a lot of moves or a lot of big moves in the offseason, but making ones that were really good for the team and just address needs. Looking at their opponents for next season, it's not the easiest schedule in the world. Playing in the AFC South, so playing the Texans, Colts, and Titans twice, and then playing the NFC North and AFC East, as well as the Browns, Raiders, and Eagles. Definitely a lot of tough games in there. But the Jaguars, I would say, are one of the stronger teams. I wouldn't put them in like the top tier of teams, but I do like their roster compared to a lot of others, so they will be competitive. Looking at a ceiling for the Jags, I have it 10-7, so this would be one win above where they were last season. In this scenario, I have them splitting both the Texans and the Colts while sweeping the Titans, and then at home losing only to the Packers and Jets while beating the Vikings, Patriots, and Browns. While away, I have them beating the Bears, Bills, and Raiders while losing to the Dolphins, Lions, and Eagles. So I do think they have the ability to be a playoff team. However, I am not super sold just because the AFC is really competitive. Even if they were to go 10-7, that may not be good enough for a playoff spot. Because even within their own division, the Texans and Colts are both probably going to be competing for the playoffs. So 10-7 probably won't be enough to win the division. And then looking at a wild card spot, there are a lot of teams in the AFC that are coming in very strong. The AFC East has 3 teams contending for the playoffs in the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets. The Chiefs obviously are always going to be a lock. Who really knows what else is going on in the AFC West? Maybe the Chargers could try for something, but don't really know there. And then the AFC North, all 4 of those teams are very good and could be fighting for a playoff spot. So I do think playoffs is possible in a ceiling scenario for the Jags, but even if they were to win 10 games, it might not be a lock. On the other side of things, I have a floor at 7-10. In this scenario, I have them splitting all of their division opponents, losing to the Packers, Jets, and Browns at home while beating the Vikings and Patriots, and then beating the Bears and Raiders away while losing to the Lions, Bills, Dolphins, and Eagles. In this scenario, it's more just a lot of the teams that they're playing against are good teams, and they just end up losing to them more times than not, resulting in a worse record. I do think the Jags' defense is really good. However, I'm not completely sold on their offense. I don't know if Trevor Lawrence has been the quarterback he was hyped up to be when he was drafted out of Clemson. But I don't think he's a bad quarterback. I just think that he hasn't proven enough, and we'll have to see how this new receiving core works out. I do really like Travis Etienne, but in a floor scenario, the offense is probably what disappoints. And combined with a tough schedule, I could see them being at a lower win total. As for my prediction for the Jags, it's going to be somewhere right in the middle, on the lower end between the two, though, at 8-9. In this scenario, I have them splitting all of their divisional games, then losing to the Packers and Jets at home while beating the Vikings, Patriots, and Browns, and beating the Bears and Raiders away while losing to the Lions, Bills, Eagles, and Dolphins. I imagine that the Jags will still be a pretty solid team. However, it'll just be a lot of games against tough opponents, and that's just going to result in not as many wins. I do not expect them to be a playoff team just because the AFC is super competitive, and there are, in my opinion, 2 teams within their own division that are better than them in the Texans and Colts. But Obviously, if they end up doing better than that, I'm all for it. Um, I'm not like a Jags hater or anything. I'm just not completely sold on them as a team right now of being like a lock-in playoff team, which is kind of what has been expected of them from the past few seasons, and they just haven't really been that. So if they prove me wrong, they prove me wrong, but that's where I have them at for now. So thank you so much for watching. If you have any additional input, feel free to leave a comment. And if you enjoyed this kind of video and want to see more, consider subscribing to the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I will see you in the next video.